Hi everyone. I wanted to make this short video because algebra is an important part of physics, and a lot of people don't like that. Many of you may have severe difficulties with algebra. I wish I could take that away, but I can't. And the reality is it's a good opportunity to learn, to gain some new skills, because contrary to what a lot of you think, you can learn how to do this. And many of the algebra operations that we do in this class are very simple. This sheet, these examples that I'm going to take you through, are representative of a lot of the algebra that we're going to do. It's not that tough. So I'm going to give these problems to you in this format. I will give you the equation first, and these are all real equations that we're going to use in this class. So F equals ma means force equals mass times acceleration. And then I tell you that m equals 20, a equals 3, and f equals question mark. This tells us what to plug in. So we're going to plug in 20 for m, we're going to plug in 3 for a, and f is what we want to solve for. So we're going to do that. We're going to solve. It tells us what the answer should be when we get to it. And we're going to talk about a few calculator things along the way. So we'll do this. I do want to say, just as by way of reminder, because it's been a long time for some people with algebra, just remember that if two letters are next to each other, that means they're supposed to be multiplied. We'll also have subscript. So subscript is a small letter that's below the other letter. Subscript just helps to delineate one variable from another. For instance, in this equation, VF means final velocity, VI means initial velocity. That's not two things multiplied by each other. That's just one thing. That's one number. Same thing with AC. And then subscripts are meaningful. This means to square that number, which is multiply by itself. And then dividing is when two letters, variables are one on top of another. Okay, so let's rewrite this equation. So this would be the equation we're going to use. These are the numbers that we're going to plug in there. So we're going to substitute. This is called substituting. We're going to substitute these numbers for these variables. So the substitution step would look like this. I'm going to leave this as an F because that's what I'm solving for. That's what I want to know. Don't change it to an X. Don't change it to a question mark. Don't put a box. Don't put a blank. Leave it F, because when you get to the end, you're going to want to know what you found, what you solved for. We're going to plug 20 in for M. We're going to plug 3 in for A. And I really like to substitute numbers in parentheses like this, and I strongly recommend that you do that. If you don't, it can get a little hairy for how to enter them. So for instance, a lot of people don't write this down, but if you don't put these in parentheses, it looks like this, right? And that looks like 203. Some people like to put a multiply there, but then that multiply can sometimes turn a little bit and look like an add. You're just not sure. So what I like to do is, this is a very strict way to do substitution. Wherever there's a letter that I know what the value is, I insert that value in for a letter and I put it in parentheses, very, very simply, and that's it. So notice, instead of an M, I have a 20 with parentheses around it. Instead of an A, I have a 3 with parentheses around it. They're still next to each other, so I still follow the rules for algebra. That means to multiply, and the force here is indeed 60. We're going to do this one. Actually, the reality is this problem involved no algebra whatsoever. It's just arithmetic. We're just multiplying things. In this one, we are doing algebra. What I mean by the word algebra is we're actually doing some rearranging of this equation. So let's substitute numbers in. This one happens to be in scientific notation, so 1.5 times 10 to the 4th equals, and make sure this is in parentheses, right? Because that's the W. It's going in here for the W. D is 5 and F is what we're looking for. So I'm just going to leave the F as it is. If I'm looking for it, just leave it. And our D is 5. It's going to go in for this D. So it should look like this. So with algebra, remember, all we're trying to do is to isolate this variable. Whatever we're looking for, we're trying to isolate it. We're trying to get it on its own, by itself, which means all the other numbers around it, we got to get away from it. And we do that in an outside to in sort of fashion. This one doesn't apply because there's only one step. So a couple of rules with algebra is that whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side of the equation. As long as you do that, what you're doing is not wrong. You might perform a step that doesn't help you very much, but at least what you're doing isn't wrong. So whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And then the operation that you choose, right? We either got add, subtract, multiply, or divide. There's only 4 operations. The operation you choose must be the opposite operation of what's going on. Right, so this is f times 5. They are multiplied. The opposite of multiplication is division, right? So there's sort of an artificial division right here. The opposite of subtract is add, vice versa. The opposite of multiply is divide, and vice versa. So we're going to divide by, and here's what we do. People at this point know, okay, I got to divide because those are multiplied, but what do we divide by? Well, remember, like I said, as long as you divide by the same thing on both sides, it's not wrong. But we want to divide by the thing that's going to get rid of this number. And the way to get rid of it is to divide by it. We always divide by the number that's next to the variable we're solving for. If I divide by this number, 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 1f is what we're trying to find, basically. So I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. It gets rid of it here. 1.5 times 10 to the 4th divided by 5 is the arithmetic operation that we need to do. So what I'm going to do on my calculator here, 1.5 times 10 to the 4th, I'm going to type in 1.5, right, gives it up there. And then the scientific notation button on these calculators is this times 10 in button. So I'm just going to hit that, and it gives me the scientific notation, and all I have to do is put the exponent there to the 4th, right? And then divide that by 5, and I get 3,000, and that is indeed the answer that we needed to get. So I'm going to say F equals 3,000. Let's look at another one, number 3, VF equals VI plus AT. In this class, this will be final speed or final velocity, initial velocity, acceleration, and time. So we're given acceleration, final velocity, and initial velocity, and asked to solve for time. These are very much like what we're going to be doing this year, some of the problems that we'll be doing. So we're going to substitute numbers. VF is 8, VI is 0, plus is part of the equation, so it needs to come down. That's another good thing to know with algebra. Make sure you got good algebra mechanics. Make sure that you can follow every single thing in this equation down to the next line, including the equal sign. Some people forget the equal sign. The VI comes down to the next line. The plus comes down to the next line. And then A is 2. That came down, right? I can follow it down. And the T is going to go in right there. That's what we're solving for. All right, so a couple of steps on this algebra equation. We got to get rid of all the numbers. You know what I'm going to do? This is more beneficial. Let's, instead of VI is 0, let's say VI is 2. Let's start with that. So instead of a 0 here, we've actually got a 2. Let's do that. So there's a couple of steps that we need to do this algebra. This is what I'm solving for. I got to get all these numbers away from it. One thing that people do wrong here is they see this plus and they simply add these two, and you cannot do that. You cannot combine like terms. This says 2 and this says 2 times t. 2 times t plus 2 is not 4 times t. Just as an example, to prove that's the case, let's just say t equals 1, right? You know what? Scratch all that. Just trust me. There's certain values that just by chance actually work out the same way. Just trust me. Do not add unlike terms. This one has a t, this one doesn't. You can't put them together. So we start to have to deal with this one first because it's the farthest away from the variable that we're solving for. Again, everything came down. So what we're going to do is get rid of this one first. The relationship between this and this is addition, so we're going to subtract first. We're going to subtract 2 from both sides. 8 minus 2 is 6. Again, we did the same thing on both sides. It gives us 6 on the left. It gets rid of this number on the right because 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 plus anything doesn't change anything, so that gets rid of that place in the equation. I'm going to bring down the equal sign, very important, and bring down my 2t because I did not do anything to the 2t. 2t is multiplied. To get rid of the 2, I'm going to divide, and we're going to always divide by the number that's next to the variable we're solving for. Divide by 2, and that's given us, should be 3. Oh yeah, this is the wrong answer because if vi was 0, it would be 4. T is 3 right here if our vi was 2. All right. Let's look at this one. This one is a really important one to know because the variable we're solving for is v, and it's squared in the equation. So let's look at how to do this. Maybe come forward a bit here. There we go. All right, so it says it gives us this AC and the R, and we're going to solve for v. So AC would be 1.2. I'm going to plug in 1.2 right here. I'm solving for v. So I'm going to leave it exactly the same in this equation. I don't know why there's a dot right there. There shouldn't be. Oh, did I put that there? Leave that the same, and R is 3 times 10 to the negative 2. A couple of things you could do with this. You could put it in the calculator, or you can just put that in regular notation on your own. This negative 2 tells you how many places and what direction to move the decimal. The decimal is here, understood, and it says to move it 2 to the left, which would be like this, right? No, 1, 2, no, 0.03. If we go 2 to the left, I would prefer to do that, so I think that's what I'm going to do right there. So I'm just going to make a note to myself and make that 0.03. All right, so let's again start to figure out how to get rid of these numbers. We're going to get rid of the one that's farthest away from the variable we're solving for first, and that happens to be this one. I'm going to get rid of this number 2, but that's closest to it. I've got to do this one first. Right? This relationship right here is division, so we're going to do the opposite of division. We're going to multiply. If we multiply on both sides by 0.03, it gets rid of this number, and the reason it gets rid of it is because there's 1 on the bottom and 1 on the top, and they cancel out, right? So imagine that it's a fraction like that. We're multiplying by the same thing on the top, and it gets rid of it. But whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other, times 0.03, and 1.2 times 0.03 gives us 0.036. So we have that on the left side. We're still left with the v squared. Again, I'm bringing everything down. I changed this because I did some arithmetic. Bring down the equal sign, bring down the v squared because we didn't change the v squared. So how do we get rid of this squared? Well, we still have to do the opposite operation. The only operation I talked about that is not in these is squared, right? And the opposite of squaring is square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. If I take the square root of this side, it gives me v, which is what I'm looking for. The square root of v squared is v. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So we're going to take the square root of 0.036. So I'm going to go second and hit my square root button right here. It gives me the radical. And then go second, and then the A and S button at the bottom puts under the radical the number that I just got. Going to hit enter, and it gives me 0.019 or 0.19, which is what our answer is. Last problem here. This type of equation is really important to notice. Notice it's the same type here. Basically, what we going on when I say the same type, I mean that we basically have a fraction equal to a fraction. There's always an understood 1 under here. So we basically have a fraction equal to a fraction, and there's a really important thing that we can do with these, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But this one's very similar. They give you P, it gives you T, and it asks to find W. So we're going to plug numbers in here. P is 42. Bring down the equal sign. W is what we're solving for. That's got to stay. And my time is 2.5. This is exactly the same problem as the one up above. We're going to multiply by 2.5 on both sides. It gets rid of it on the right. 2.5 times 42 happens to be 105. So I'm going to bring that down. bring down my equal sign, and bring down my w because I didn't change it, and that's our answer. And the reason that's our answer is because this is not squared. We don't have to do the same thing as we did here. Our w is not squared, so that's the answer there. Let's see. Let's look at this one here. I wanted to look at number 8. Remember I told you about a fraction equal to a fraction. Here's another equation like that. We're going to learn this equation very soon. V equals d over t. So we're given the v and we're given the d. So this one's a little bit different than the two previous ones I did, even though it's the same type of equation. It's still a fraction equal to a fraction. So let's look at what we have. V is 30. Got to plug that in. Bring down my equal sign. D is 6. That's on the top now. So my D is on the top. And the time on the bottom is what I'm solving for. Now this right here, pay attention to this. This is the absolute most missed algebra operation in this class. Because many people here think, okay, well, these are divided, so I'm going to multiply by 6 to get rid of it, right? So let me just show you what not to do here. I'm going to go down to the bottom and do it. If I have 30 equals 6 over t, if I multiply by 6 on both sides, remember what I told you, as long as you do the same thing on both sides, it's not wrong. But notice, it doesn't give you what you want. So on this side, 6 times 30 is what? 180. Bring down my equal sign. But on this side, we have not gotten rid of the 6 because they don't cancel each other out. There's an understood 1 under here. You got a fraction multiplied by a fraction. When you multiply fractions, you got to multiply straight across. 6 times 6 is 36. So we actually just made our problem bigger. We ended up with 136 equals 36t. It's not wrong. It's still true. It's still a true equation. But we didn't do anything for ourselves. So the reality is, since these, it's not quite correct to think about it in this way. We've got to get rid of the 6th in another way, right? There's a couple of ways to think about this. These two are divided, but remember that the way we got to get rid of the 6 and make it a 1 is to divide by, and put the 6 on the bottom. But that's a really big problem here because we're multiplying by a fraction here, multiplying by 1/6, and it cancels there. And so let me rewrite this. 30 equals 6 over t, and we're going to multiply by the 1. The 6's cancel here, and so we're going to multiply by 1/6 over here, and the 6 goes under here. We got 30 divided by 6, which is 5 on this side. We're still left with 1 over t over here. We got some more junk to do. Don't mess with this, right? When you have a fraction equal to a fraction, here's what you do, right? Write this down. Cross multiply. Right? I'm not a math teacher. I can't explain exactly how this works in math terms, but remember there's an understood 1 under here. You cross multiply first. It gives you a new equation. We're going to multiply these two numbers. We're going to multiply these two numbers. Get us a new equation. 30 times t is 30t. 1 times 6 is 6. That's how we do it. This equation is equivalent to this one. Notice if we divide by 30 here, divide by t, we end up with the same thing we had before. So now we just got to solve this. Divide by the number next to the variable we're solving for because they're multiplied, so we're going to divide. Gets rid of the 30 on this side. 6 divided by 30 is what we're going to do, and that happens to be 0.2, and that is our answer. Now, that was a bit long. Let me give you a shortcut. Notice what we actually did. 6 divided by 30. Here's the shortcut here. Go back to the original equation we had. 30 equals 6 over t. Remember this. This is an easy shortcut because you'll have this equation a lot where you're having to solve for the variable in the denominator. When that happens, all you got to do is switch places with these guys. T comes over here, 30 comes down here. Notice that's exactly what we had right here. You end up dividing 6 divided by 30. You get 0.2. All right, I want you to try. Here's 3 problems left for you. They're all pretty simple, except for the last one. It'd be a little more of a challenge. Do this one and this one. Pause the video and write those numbers down. And then I also want you to do number 9. Pause the video, write those numbers down. This will be a bit of a challenge. See if you can get to that answer.